Spain, early 16th century, around 1515 AD. Castal breathes under stone and incense. Bells toll across Avila's thick medieval walls, their sound echoing like a warning rather than a welcome. This is a land hardened by conquest and piety, where faith is measured not by tenderness, but by endurance. And within these walls, in a noble household shadowed by discipline and honor, a restless girl named Teresa de Ávila, whom Ada learns early that God is not gentle. She is intelligent, quick of speech, and dangerously imaginative. As a child, Teresa devours the lives of saints the way others devour romance. Martyrs, deserts, blood, and fire. At 7 years old, she tries to run away to seek martyrdom among the Moors, believing death would open heaven like a door swung wide. She is stopped at the city gate, pulled back into the world of caution and propriety. But something has already taken root. Teresa has tasted the idea of total surrender, and the idea refuses to leave her. Years pass. Her mother dies young, and Teresa kneels before an image of the Virgin, asking for a new protector. Yet grief fractures her devotion. She becomes charming, admired, dangerously fond of admiration itself. Conversations stretch too long. Vanity creeps in. Even as she enters the Carmelite convent of the Incarnation in Avila, she does not enter as a saint. She enters as a divided soul. The convent is not what the world imagines. It is large, crowded, and comfortable. Over 100 nuns pass through its halls. Visitors come freely. Gossip drifts like smoke. Wealth cushions discipline. Silence is optional. Prayer is shared space with ambition, family influence, and social survival. Teresa feels it immediately, the distance between what Carmel was meant to be and what it has become. Then her body rebels. Illness strikes without mercy. Fevers, paralysis, pain so intense she cannot move or speak. For days she is believed dead, her body laid out as if already claimed by the grave. Inside, Teresa experiences something far worse than pain: emptiness. Prayer dries up. God feels absent. She wonders if her earlier fervor was only imagination, if her soul is hollow. When she recovers, she does not rise stronger, but weaker, ashamed of her weakness, afraid of silence. Years slip by in compromise. She prays, but without fire. She obeys, but without conviction. She knows the rules, yet senses they have lost their sharpness. At night, alone in her cell, Teresa feels a pressure she cannot name, as if truth itself is pressing against her chest, demanding to be faced. She begins to understand something terrifying. Mediocrity can survive inside holiness for a very long time. Then the visions begin. Not light at first, not comfort, but awareness. An inner disturbance that interrupts her prayers, uninvited and unwelcome. She feels watched, not by men, but by God himself. She resists, suspecting deception. In Spain, visions are dangerous. The Inquisition listens closely. False mystics vanish quietly. Teresa tells herself to ignore what is happening inside her, to remain reasonable, obedient, silent. But silence becomes unbearable. One afternoon, she kneels before a small statue of Christ scourged at the pillar, blood carved in wood, wounds frozen in time, and suddenly the distance collapses. Teresa feels seen, not praised, not condemned, but known. Her past distractions, her vanity, her half-hearted devotion rise before her without accusation. The realization cuts deeper than any illness. She has been living divided, offering God fragments instead of everything. Tears come without warning, not dramatic, not performative, private and shaking. Teresa understands that reform will not begin in counsels or commands. It will begin inside the soul, or not at all. Yet fear follows close behind revelation. If she speaks of this hunger for a stricter, poorer, more silent Carmel, she will be mocked. If she insists, she will be resisted. And if she is wrong, if these inner urgings are not from God, then she risks spiritual ruin. The safest path is to remain as she is, respected, obedient, unremarkable. But something has already shifted. Once a soul glimpses truth, comfort turns into a kind of prison. What would you have done in this moment? Clung to safety, or followed a voice that could cost you everything? As Teresa rises from the chapel floor, wiping her tears, she does not yet know she is standing at the edge of a revolution. She only knows this: the Carmel she lives in is not the Carmel she was promised. And the distance between the two is beginning to feel like a wound that will not close. Wound that will not close. Teresa tries, at first, to outrun it. Days return to routine. Bells, prayers, conversations that drift too easily into comfort. But the inner pressure only tightens. When she speaks, she measures every word. When she prays, she feels watched by a truth that refuses to soften itself. The statue of the scourged crest remains behind her eyes, silent and unyielding. It has undone her excuses. Soon, the visions sharpen, not spectacles meant to impress, but moments of intrusion. Sudden clarity, piercing awareness, a sense of being seized by something far greater than herself. Teresa trembles under it. She seeks counsel from confessors, learned men trained to detect illusion and pride. Some listen carefully. Others recoil. A woman claiming inner prayer is dangerous territory in 16th century Spain. She is imagining things, one warns. Better to distrust such experiences, says another. Obedience matters more than fervor. Teresa obeys. She always has. She tries to suppress the visions, to ground herself in rule and routine, but the cost is severe. When she resists, her soul feels dry and heavy, as if wrapped in cloth. When she surrenders, peace follows, but so does fear. Peace, she learns, is not always gentle. Sometimes it demands everything. Then comes the moment she will later describe with trembling restraint, the piercing of the heart. No blade of iron, something far deeper. A pain that is also sweetness, unbearable yet desired. Teresa does not speak of it publicly. She barely dares to name it in private. She fears deception, fears madness. It fears that God himself is testing her discernment by fire. The experience leaves her physically weak, spiritually exposed, and irrevocably changed. There is no returning to half measures now. She begins to read the early rule of Carmel. The desert hermits, the silence, the poverty, the radical solitude that once defined the order. What she sees makes her uneasy. What surrounds her convent bears little resemblance to these origins. Visitors chatter in parlors. Donations soften discipline. Prayer bends around convenience. Teresa understands something deeply unsettling. Reform will not be welcomed by those who have grown comfortable inside decay. Quietly, cautiously, she begins to speak with a few trusted sisters. Not with fire, but with questions. What if Carmel was small again? What if silence mattered? What if prayer were not shared space with distraction? Some listen with curiosity. Others stiffen. Reform threatens stability, and stability protects reputations, families, influence. Resistance forms before plans do. Word reaches superiors. Teresa is warned not to disturb the peace. She is reminded of her place, her gender, her obligation to humility. A woman proposing reform sounds dangerously close to a woman claiming authority. Teresa bows her head outwardly, but inwardly, something hardens. Then illness returns. Her body collapses again, as if echoing the pressure inside her soul. Confined, Weak, uncertain whether she will rise once more, Teresa confronts a final fear. What if she dies having seen the truth and done nothing? What if obedience becomes an excuse for cowardice? In her weakness, resolve clarifies. If reform is to happen, it will be small, hidden, poor, a single house, a handful of women willing to live stripped of comfort and distraction. No endowments, no visitors, only prayer silenced and trust in God alone. It sounds impossible. It sounds reckless. It sounds like failure before it even begins. And yet, peace settles when she imagines it. She seeks permission. Doors close. She waits. She prays. She is accused of ambition disguised as holiness. She doubts herself in the night, asking whether her desire is pride wearing sacred language. Each delay sharpens the tension. Each refusal tests whether her vision is real or merely her own hunger. Could you endure years of doubt, knowing the truth might still cost you everything? Finally, through fragile alliances and hesitant approvals, a crack opens in the wall of resistance. Not wide, not safe, just enough. Teresa steps toward it knowing full well once crossed, there will be no protection left, no reputation to hide behind, no comfort to retreat into, and no guarantee that this reform will survive her own fragile body. As the plan takes shape in whispers and prayer, one truth becomes unavoidable. She is no longer asking whether Carmel should be rebuilt. She is asking whether she is willing to be broken first. To be broken first. Teresa does not announce the beginning of reform with trumpets or sermons. It begins in near secrecy under suspicion, with borrowed funds and borrowed courage. In 1562, beyond the comfort of large convent walls, a small, poor house opens in Avila. There are no endowments to ensure survival. The cells are narrow. The rule is strict. Silence is not symbolic, it is lived. The sisters walk barefoot, not as spectacle, but as reminder. This is the birth of the Discalced Carmelites. Almost immediately, opposition ignites. City officials protest the poverty-fearing scandal. Carmelite authorities bristle at disobedience disguised as holiness. Rumors spread Teresa is unstable, deluded, dangerous. A woman founding a new observance unsettles the careful balance of power. Even priests argue over her visions, divine or demonic, grace or pride. Teresa listens, absorbs the blows, and writes nothing in her own defense. Instead, she prays. Inside the silence she demanded of others, Teresa discovers a harsher silence within herself. Leadership does not bring ecstasy. It brings responsibility, fear, and relentless self-scrutiny. Nights stretch long. Doubt returns, whispering that she has ruined everything, that this reform will collapse after her death, or worse, be condemned in her lifetime. Then the road calls her. Against age, illness, and expectation, Teresa begins to travel. On foot, by mule, through freezing winters and suffocating heat. Spain is vast and dangerous. Inns are crude. Roads are watched. Each foundation is a gamble. Some welcome her. Others close their gates. More than once, she arrives to find permission withdrawn or funding vanished. Each refusal carves deeper lines into her body and soul. Yet the foundations grow. Medina del Campo, Malagan, Valladolid. Each new convent mirrors the first, small, enclosed, severe. Teresa insists the sisters be equals, bound by prayer rather than status. She writes letters late into the night, guiding, correcting, encouraging. Her words are sharp, practical, and painfully honest. Mysticism, she insists, is not escape. It is endurance. As opposition sharpens, so does her clarity. She understands now that reform was never about buildings or rules. It was about stripping away illusions. especially the illusion that holiness can coexist comfortably with distraction. Her visions no longer frighten her. They steady her. The God she once feared as distant has become demanding, intimate, relentless. Even near the end, the struggle does not ease. She is misunderstood by her own order, investigated, exhausted. Her body bends under constant travel. Her hands swell. Her heart weakens. Yet she refuses to slow. Now is not the time to treat with God about trifles, she writes, knowing her hours are narrowing. In 1582, far from home, Teresa lies dying in a small cell. No visions are recorded, no miracles announced, only fatigue and peace. Around her, the reform she feared would die with her is alive, breathing quietly in the silence of cloisters she will never see again. Her last lesson is not thunderous. True reform, Teresa shows, is not loud. It is costly. It demands the courage to dismantle what feels safe in order to recover what was lost. She rebuilt Carmel not with power, but with obedience sharpened by truth, and love stripped of illusion. Could you live with less if it meant living more truthfully? Centuries later, her footsteps have faded from Spain's roads, but the silence she fought for remains. And in that silence, her life asks its final question, not to nuns alone, but to anyone listening. What would you be willing to lose to become whole? If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments and walk with us through more forgotten lives that reshaped history, not by force, but by faith.